Hey guys, for today we're going to take a look at all of the new EX Augments for NGS that just got added with this big update. First off, for these are pretty game-changing over other augments within the game, because besides just giving potency and potency floor, which was actually pretty high for augments right now, they give an extra effect depending on which one that it is. And there are 22 of these in total. So this Gradual Pressing, for instance, gives extra down factor up to 20% towards enemies. So this is pretty huge for getting more and more downs. But then you have interesting ones like this Tri-Shield here that gives you 3 shields to completely negate enemy damage, and those regenerate every 2 minutes. And then there's even one that just sets you on fire for additional benefits. So there's a lot of ones that are similar to those that give a unique effect to change how you would play or tackle the different fights. So how do you actually start getting these EX Augments? Well, they can only appear on these Eridim weapons pre-affixed to them and are not like capsules like the rest of the augments in the game. So you have to get these to drop in the new Nameless City quest, which is actually easily enough to get into. You just gotta complete the main story, chapter 7 first, and then you can go into this at the quest counter with at least 3960 battle power. And the quest is actually pretty fun to play, and it's simple enough. You go around this city trying to collect as many points as you possibly can within a 15-minute time limit, either by exploring or killing enemies. And then while you're doing so, you open these chests with those said points to then get you those Eridim weapons. And it seems to be a pretty high chance of getting those. So you should be able to get like 10 or so for each run. I'll probably go more in depth on the Nameless City in a different video, but that's the gist of this quest. So getting the Eridim weapons is currently the only way to get these EX Augments, and because of that, you have to play RNG with trying to get the perfect set of 3 on any of these weapons, because you can't just pluck and take out one of these EX Augments and put it into something else, and then take one from like here and put it into the same thing. You can't do that. You need the perfect set of 3, and then you can transfer that set of 3 into something else if you wanted to, with the augment transfer system that also got added with this update. Honestly, it isn't as bad as it sounds, because for the majority of the player base, you can pretty much just settle for any of these EX Augments, because they all have very similar potency and potency floor on all of these. They'll have around 4.5% potency and 2% potency floor for whatever ones that you choose. Some of them have a little bit different of potency, but for the most part, it's just little extra effects that kind of cater to different styles of gameplay. So if I was just like a regular player, not trying to min-max and squeeze every little bit out of these things, then I would just try to shoot for like 2 out of the 3 to be fitting to what I want to do. Try to go for 3 out of 3 perfectly for these things might drive you insane. Because, let me remind you, there are 22 of these things. So if you're trying to go for the perfect 3 out of 3, that's going to be a 1 out of 1,540 chance to try to get that. And it's even going to be worse, because technically, there's more with this lettering system that we'll talk about later. But in addition to that, it does seem like some of these are weighted as well. What I mean by that is that some seem to be more likely to show up on the Eredims than others. So if I look up, let's say, that Tri-Shield one, it's only going to show like a page worth on the shop, at least on ship 3. But if I look up the Gradual Pressing, for instance, the R version, then it's going to show multiple pages, several pages, I think over 10 pages in just the first day, which I think that's a huge disparity between the different augments. Like, I can't 100% prove that this is more likely, but I think just this alone showing way more pages in the shop kind of leans towards that being true. This is also reflected in my own drops. I got about 80 Eredims here, and I haven't really sold any. If I look up the Gradual Pressing, about half of my Eredims have the Gradual Pressing in some way on them. And then if I look up the Tri-Shields, only about 10 or 1/8 of my drops have the Tri-Shield on it. So, like I said, I can't absolutely prove that there's weighting with these augments, but it definitely seems like it. Let's move on, though, to actually talking about these individual augments and what kind of effects they do and what kind of buffs they have to see which ones you want to go for. I made a Google Sheet here referencing all of the EX Augments in alphabetical order, which is a huge help versus just looking at it in game. And if you guys want to reference this too, I'll leave it in the description somewhere down below. Yeah, starting with the first one, we have Dazzle Camouflage, which has 4.5% potency and 2% potency floor. This is going to be pretty much the same for the rest of the augments. Some of them have a little bit less potency here, and I'll say when it does. But then it has a substat of some kind based on the letter that is also tied to the augment's name. So it has one of these letters, D, H, P, R, and X, and that's the same for all of these augments. And that gives us certain extra substats. So D is 1% damage resistance, H is 25 HP, P is 3 photon points, R is 5% all down resistance, and X is a mix of HP and photon points. So this is just an extra RNG layer on top of the RNG augments. So I would definitely not worry about this at all, because it's more important to go for the actual augments, like no matter the letter, trying to get the extra effects, than it is the extra substats on top. It would be such an incredibly low chance to get the perfect letters on the perfect 3 augments that you need. So I would just not worry about that and just accept what you get with these letters. But for the rest of this Dazzle Camouflage, we have threat level reduction even if you attack. This basically works just like the Stealth Strike from Ranger. So you can get that benefit without having this skill, essentially. I don't know if the threat level is different, because this changes your threat level to 20% here. So I don't know if like the Dazzle Camouflage does even less or is equal or higher. It's kind of hard to test, but I imagine that it's good enough to where you could go without this skill in most cases. The reason to have Dazzle Camouflage is the exact same as Stealth Strike. We're trying to prolong the long-range advantage for as long as possible for the weapons and classes that can use it. This increases your PA damage to boss enemies that are not targeting you. That's a good chunk of 15% extra potency. So just increasing the likelihood of you not getting aggro, for party play at least, so you can keep getting that damage. This, of course, has no benefit in solo play because you're the only one to get the aggro in the room, so it just isn't going to do anything for you. But yeah, this saves you from choosing the Ranger subclass and getting Stealth Strikes. You can just subclass something else if you wanted to, or if you're Ranger, I guess it saves you a skill point there. Next, we have an interesting one, Endure Pain PB Boost. This gives 2% to your Photon Blast gauge on HP decrease, and then has a 10-second cooldown before it can do it again. So this can proc from any source of damage, either from the enemies or yourself, ailments, whatever it is. This will give you 2% to the gauge at least once every 10 seconds. Yeah, this one is... it feels better than like having Orgsys in terms of building your gauge, but you do need to proc it enough to make it feel that good. There are other EX Augments that make you damage yourself, so that pairs well with something like this versus just trying to force yourself to get hit by the enemy all the time. Then we have a simple one, Enemy Down PP Gauge, which gives you 50% of your photon points back whenever you down a nearby enemy. This one's really nice because it does scale with how much photon points you have. So if you have 200, you get 100 back, which is huge for downs, especially if you're caught off guard with low photon points. So that lets you keep doing PAs and techniques instead of just doing like normal attacks or something else to make up for photon points. Then we have a closely named one, Enemy Field PP Gauge, which this is very similar to the Christia weapon potential or the Force class skill, which gives photon points back when you defeat enemies. So this is great for mobbing or PSC bursting, and this allows you to go without the Force subclass. You can use something else for like extra damage or whatever you need for mobbing. Fortitude, which is another PP battery-like one, and when your PP falls below 10%, you instantly recover 200 photon points. But it does go on to a 180-second cooldown or 3-minute cooldown after it does so before you can do it again. And the effect doesn't start until 10 seconds after equipped. So you can't just like switch to a weapon that has this, instantly get this PP, and then switch to something else. You do need to have the weapon out for at least 10 seconds before something like this can proc. It's pretty much a failsafe for your PP, and similar to having like an automatic overemphasis for your photon points. Out of the PP battery ones here that we mentioned already. Like, between the enemy down PP gauge with a 50% recovery for downs and this, that gives you 200 when you fall below 10%. I think the Fortitude is probably better because in most fights, like, you'd get a down in about the 3-minute time anyways, or even longer. And this only gives you half of your bar. This gives you a guaranteed 200, which is going to be typically more, I would think, than this 50%, because I don't think anybody out there has a bar that is 400 photon points, at least not yet. Then there's Fortune Sign, which you have a 20% chance that a Rest Assign or a Reverse Assign won't be consumed when you use either of them. And then it's similar to the Fortitude, where that effect can only happen after you've equipped that said weapon that has this augment for at least 10 seconds. So I guess this is like kind of nice if you are running out like a lot during fights. But I think most of the time you shouldn't really have an issue with either of those things, at least not yet for most of the content. So if I were to say like if any of these are bad, quote unquote, this would probably be one of them. And then we have Gradual PP Gauge, which I think is one of the better ones for gaining PP back, because this just gives you straight up 7 photon points every 5 seconds. There's no condition to it, it just keeps happening. So this will just keep you topped up, I would think, over time. You could probably still spend faster than that, but it's going to give you more photon points over the course of a fight than like the Fortitude would, or the enemy down PP Gauge. The only one that can compete is enemy field gauge, but that's only if you're in a PSE burst or a combat zone, something like that. For this next one, it's the culprit of being super common out of all of these augments, as we saw, but it's actually not a bad augment. It's actually pretty good to have anyways, so it's good that it's common, because it increases your down factor to enemies by 5% every 10 seconds, and it goes up to a maximum of 20%. I believe the way that this works is that once you enter a new area or an instance, then you start at 0% down factor, but then it increases by 5% every 10 seconds, up to that maximum of 20. So it just takes 40 seconds within a quest to get to that number, which most quests that at least matter, you're definitely going to be in there 40 seconds long. So just like purple triggers, the 4-man boss encounters, even some Arcs records and cocoons, you're going to be in there at least that long. So you might be able to trigger an extra down or a few, and that's going to help a lot in terms of your DPS. This is basically like having the Bouncer class skill, the Defeat Amplifier. The subclass has 15% here, the main has 25%, and this EX is basically in the middle at its maximum. So you could use the augment to replace this class skill, essentially, or you could use them both at the same time, because I do think that they stack together. I don't see why not. And with both of them together, you're just going to be downing way more. And if everybody in your party had it, you might be able to even stun lock certain bosses. Moving on to the next one, we have Heavy Attack Protect. And right now, this one in game says damage resistance plus 15% against non-boss enemies. This has been confirmed to be a translation error. It's actually supposed to be against bosses, and that's how it currently works. So this is good for whenever you're just facing bosses, which is most of the hard content. So whenever they're hitting you with a hard attack, this can save you, perhaps, or when you're getting hit by like smaller attacks, it might save you from using as much Resta. Next, we have a pretty crazy one, Hysterical Strength, which does give the most potency overall versus the rest of these EX augments. At first, it's just 4%, which is lower than the 4.5% generic potency. But if you get a status ailment, you get an additional 2% potency on top of it, plus offensive PP recovery plus 10%, and an extra 10% damage resistance while that ailment is going. So this is a bit weird because like most of the fights don't really have an ailment to give to you. And even if they do, it's not like you really want to get hit for this. But as you saw in the beginning, there is another EX augment that can burn yourself that we'll talk about later down in the list. So basically you have to pair that one with this for it to really work consistently. Moving on to the next one, we have Just Frame Counter, which goes back to the 4.5% potency. It has an interesting effect, but I don't think it's all too great for optimal play. This gives you a sidestep counter whenever you perform a normal attack after you breakfall a launch or knockback. So whenever you get knocked off of your feet or prone and jump back up and do a normal attack right after that, it turns into a sidestep counter instead of just like a regular normal. So I think the idea around this is if you missed your counter, like you timed it wrong and you got hit, it still lets you get a counter in after the fact. I mean, you're still taking like the full damage from the attack or whatever, but at least you're still getting your counter, which is typically high damage. Unfortunately, I think this is another one that I would chalk up to being a bad EX Augment because, like I said, it's not really good for optimal play. I think the only situation where you really use this is if you're a new player still trying to learn the timing of all of the different attacks with the different bosses or enemies and how the game works. And another problem with this is that you can't get a sidestep counter in whenever an enemy hits you. It's only when they hit you enough to knock back you or launch you. Because there's some attacks that just like stagger you and it doesn't allow you to get this sidestep counter in. Then we have the light attack protect, which is pretty much the exact same as the heavy attack, except for it actually is against non-boss enemies. And the damage resistance this time is 30%, so quite a bit higher. However, I think this is like one of those bad augments as well, where what kind of situation do you need damage resistance against mobs only, just the trash enemies? They're not doing a whole lot of damage anyways, and there isn't really like content. There's a ton of mobs, and it's like a long quest, and there's like a boss too, where like limited lives or something. Besides, like Geometric Labyrinth rank 1 from forever ago, but that is completely dead content. So right now, this is not useful. Next though, we have Lively HP Starlings, which is actually very useful. That's just 4% potency for the generic here, but it's very easy to meet its condition for even more potency, the 1.5% here. You just gotta be at 95% HP or greater, and then you also get 5% damage resistance on top of that. So this is just how you would play normally anyways, is try to stay at full HP at like all times. So that just gives you extra damage for doing the thing that you've always been doing anyways. So there you go. That's just one of the better ones for DPS for essentially free. Then we got Patient Defense, which is another 4.5% potency augment. And this gives damage resistance plus 15% on HP decrease up to a maximum of 25%. And then the bonus resets if no damage is taken after 30 seconds. So this one is basically if you just keep getting hit over and over again, then it stacks more and more damage resistance to help mitigate the other hits. And the way that this works is like when you get hit the first time, it doesn't have any damage resistance, you're at 0. And then for the following hit, the second hit, then you got the 15%. Then if you get hit a third time, that's where you have the full 25% on that third hit. And then every hit afterwards, if you keep still getting hit, it's just going to stay at 25% until you don't take damage for 30 seconds. But because how this is worded with on HP decrease, it works exactly the same as the Endure Pain PB boost thing with the Photon Blast Gauge plus 2% on HP decrease, where if you have other sources that you can proc yourself that decreases your own HP, then it also gives you this bonus. So other EX augments can do that, or certain class skills can allow this to happen. One thing to keep in mind right now with this as well is that the H variant, the letter H1, shows a 5% damage resistance versus the 15 here, which they have confirmed that it is incorrect and it should be 15% just like the rest of the different lettered ones. But moving on to the next thing, this actually kind of plays into that HP decrease, Risky Stance. So this has a 30% chance to recover 10 HP when hit by attack, which has a 5-second cooldown. But then it has a 10% chance of 1 damage to yourself with a 10-second cooldown. So this is a bit of a loaded one. So first off with this damage, this chance is tied to your attacks. So for every attack that you're doing, it has a 10% chance of doing a damage to yourself. And once it does that 1 damage, it then has a 10-second cooldown until it can have a chance to proc again. But yeah, this 1 damage is very important because it can trigger this other part of the same augment to give you 10 photon points back, because this does count as an attack, at least against yourself. So once this 1 damage procs, you have another 30% chance to get 10 PP back. But the more important part is if you tie it with other EX augments that do something on HP decrease. So like this patient defense works with this risky stance, and also this endure pain PB boost procs if you get that to happen too. With that said, that makes this augment as a standalone not so great, but if you pair it with the right other EX augments, then it can be very, very good to keep proccing those amazing bonuses. Moving on to the next thing, we have Shortage HP Starling. So this is the exact opposite of the Lively HP Starling, where you want low HP to get its benefits. For this one, it's interesting because it has 4.5% always active potency, which is different from the 4% up here. And then you still get the 1.5% potency, but you need to be at 50% HP or lower. So it's a little bit of a dangerous situation there, but you do get 30% damage resistance when you're in that range. So as long as you're not getting hit by too hard of an attack, then you should be able to survive it because of this. However, I would recommend against using this augment because it's very weird to try to get into that range to where you get those benefits. First off, if like an enemy is hitting you, try to get into this range, they're hitting you for the full damage, which some of the times that might just instantly kill you. Or other times, even if you do survive, it might leave you too low of HP to survive a second hit, even with the 30% damage resistance, because it's not like they're going to leave you at like almost 50% all the time. They might leave you at like 20% or 10%, whatever, unless you have other sources of damage resistance, which that could lead to less DPS overall. But even if you did get into that range just fine, there might be other players that could affect you with this, like Force and Tectors with their Resta Field ability, where they can heal others when they use a Resta. So they might accidentally heal you, getting you out of this range. And then third, it's just impossible to get in this range without getting hit by an enemy. There are class skills where you can reduce your HP, like the PP conversion, but this only reduces it by 20%. So that'll get you to the 80, and then if you had like a second stock, that can get you to 60%, but like that's still not 50%. You need a third stock to be able to do that, and that would just take way too long to charge, and you're better off just getting hit by the enemy instead at that point. So as it currently stands, I think this is just too risky for the majority of the players, but if you like being a glass cannon, you can kind of get to this spot a bit easier with this next EX augment, which is finally the one that burns yourself, the Shortage PP Burn Up. So this is 4.5% potency, and the burn occurs when 100 photon points are consumed. So just using your PAs, and once you consume 100 PP, you inflict the burn ailment on yourself. And during that, you get natural PP recovery speed plus 30%, and there's like an additional part to the usual burn ailment in the game, where it reduces the potency or the amount of damage that you do, but for this burn, it does not apply. So what this burn does at a base is that every 2 seconds, it takes away 1% of your max HP. And if you keep applying that burn before the duration is up, it keeps leveling up to new tiers, to where eventually it gets up to 1.5% of your max HP every 2 seconds at level 5. This is definitely where the glass cannon build comes into play with these things, because you're going to be losing HP so fast, because you're going to be spending definitely 100 photon points easily to keep applying that burn over and over again. So that will definitely get you within this Shortage Starling range for this extra potency, and if you also have that thing with the ailments of the Hysterical Strength, you'll be also getting the extra potency from that. So with all of that combined, you should be getting a lot of damage. However, you're going to be in a terrible state because you'll be constantly burning, and you're going to be eating up a lot of rest assign, which gets you in and out of this Starling range right here. And like if you get hit while you're burning at low HP, you're pretty much done for. And eventually, with like longer quests, you're just going to run out of rest assign, pretty much no matter what, because you're going to be burning so fast. However, there is a caveat to this where you can't burn to death in this game. The ailments in this game cannot kill you. They do leave you at 1 HP. So you can just stay at that and keep getting those benefits, but then you have to play perfectly to keep up all of that extra potency. You cannot get hit by even the smallest attack. So theoretically, that is the highest amount of potency that you can have, but if you can't play perfectly, especially for long-winded fights, you're just going to keep dying over and over again, making you lose out on DPS because you do 0 DPS when you're dead. It's actually going to be worse for you overall versus just something standard, like just using the lively HP Starlings for a little bit extra potency there. I honestly think the only time that you could really use this blast cannon setup is if you're doing shorter arcs records, only like a few minute long things in like cocoons, to try to get the best time over everybody else on those leaderboards. I just don't see using this consistently in any other piece of content because you're just going to keep dying because things are just too long, or like if you're even in a combat zone, just PSE bursting, it's going to be more of an annoyance. Like imagine being at 1 HP all the time and dying from a little tiny mob during a burst. That would be terrible, and you don't really need that extra potency there anyways. So I would keep that kind of setup only towards time attack like things. We're competing with other people for the best time. Besides that, you could, instead of the shortage HP Starling, so you don't have to stay at 50% or below like all the time, you could use the Endure Pain PV boost because of the HP decrease for Photon Blast Gauge, and the burn does proc that too because you're decreasing your HP. But once again, that just falls in line still with the glass cannon. You're still going to be burning over time, and eventually you're going to run a rest assign with a too long quest. But hey, if you want to be a burning ranger, you definitely can do so. Let's move on to the next one though with Sign Shielding. This is damage resistance plus 20% once per one use of Rest Assign or Reverse Assign, and you can now use Rest Assign even with max HP. So how this works is whenever you use a Resta or Reverse Assign, you just get a 20% damage resist until you get hit. So once you get hit, that use goes away, and then you can use another Rest Assign or Reverse Assign to get that buff back. I tried to see if you could like stack like these buffs if you use multiple Rest Assign in a row, but it doesn't seem like it actually does that. It only stacks once, and then you get hit and you keep going back and forth. Looks like there's only a few more, and the next one is Stealth Wall, which is actually a really good one. It gives 4% potency normally, but gives an additional 1.5% against enemies not targeting you, so don't have aggro. But if you do have aggro, then 10% damage resistance is given to you. So this plays really well into classes or weapons that already have long range advantage, so they're incentivized to not be targeted. This just gives even more on top of that. Unfortunately, this isn't so great in solo play because of the less potency here, and you just always have aggro if you're playing solo in something. But it's amazing for party play, because typically if you have the right combination of stuff like Stealth Strike or the Dazzle Camouflage EX Augment, then you should always have this extra potency. This one is pretty simple. Tech Arms PP Suppress, which is another 4.5% potency augment, which has PP consumption minus 15% when using a different PA or technique. So if you use one PA and then just use a different one the next time, then that different one has less of a cost by 15%. So it isn't going to be like super huge. It's going to save you like a couple of points, but it does add up if you keep interchanging. There's other like class skills similar to this, so you might already be encouraged to do something like this with certain weapons or classes. Let's just add on top of it. Then there's Tough Mind, which is just like the Hunter's class skill Iron Will, which lets you survive a fatal blow, which leaves you at 1 HP, and gives you a moment of invulnerability afterwards to heal back up or whatever you have to do. This has a 300-second cooldown or 5 minutes before it can happen again. And the effect starts 10 seconds after equipped, so you can't just switch the weapon that has this real fast to survive fatal damage and stay alive. You have to at least have the weapon out for that long. But the biggest difference between this and the Iron Will class skill is Iron Will has way longer of a duration of invulnerability, 10 seconds long versus like 3 seconds with Tough Mind, whatever it is. It's definitely noticeably less, and the cooldown of this is only 180 seconds instead of 300. So definitely an improved version over Tough Mind. But you can actually have both at the same time. If you take fatal damage, the Tough Mind will proc first, and that gives you a moment to heal back up. And then, if you get hit for fatal damage again, then the Iron will proc. And if you get hit for fatal damage a third time before the cooldowns are up, you are then dead. So you effectively have like 3 lives to work with if you stack both of these. But if you don't heal in between, like you stay at 1 HP between the Tough Mind and the Iron Will, then the Iron Will not proc because you're already at 1 HP and you will just end up dying. Then we have our final EX Augment, the Tri-Shield. This one's actually very interesting because it generates 3 shields that negates enemy damage. Then once all the shields are lost, then there's a 120-second cooldown or 2 minutes until you get those shields back. There was a lot of questions with this one, but because it specifies enemy damage, any damage that you do to yourself doesn't actually take away any shields. So, like the Risky Stance, for instance, with the 1 damage doesn't make it go away, or the burn from the Shortage PP burn up does not make any of the shields go away, you still just take that damage. Or if you use like the PP conversion, that also just takes your HP away and doesn't take a shield. All the sources that you inflict on yourself does not take a shield away. It's only from enemy attacks that it completely negates them. What's surprising about this one, though, is that the shields are active as soon as you swap to a weapon with Tri-Shield on it. It doesn't have that 10 seconds after equipped thing. So you can actually, if you think you're going to take a big amount of damage pretty soon, or are trying to purposefully stay in a field of damage, you can actually swap to something like this, negate the damage, and then switch back to your main weapon. And when all the shields are gone, you can actually stow away the weapon with the Tri-Shield, and the cooldown is still going. So after 2 minutes, you can swap back to it and still have the 3 shields. You don't need to stay on it for the cooldown. So I think for a lot of players, it's actually going to be nice to have in their back pocket, so you can just negate damage for the majority of the attacks within the game. Just if you're not comfortable with it, or trying to be careful because you're already low HP and still need to heal, whatever it is. But it does sometimes not work in certain situations. So like with Dalian, with his orange attacks at the orange fields, unfortunately it does not negate those kind of attacks. So I imagine anything that is not counterable or sidesteppable, you cannot use the negation here to still stand in that field. And that is all of the EX Augments, just for combinations that I think are good down below. So the first one, which I kind of already mentioned, the Burning Ranger build, the Glass Cannon. So that's the burn augment with the ailment augment that benefits from the burn. And they can either use the Shortage HP Starling or the Endure Pain PB boost with that. But for a different kind of build that doesn't rely on damaging yourself, the safe build, I think like the best thing they can go for typically is the Lively HP Starlings that gives you more attack while you're at full HP, the Gradual Pressing that gives you more down factor, and then the Gradual PP Gauge is like an extra here. This is kind of like a, you can put whatever in this third slot, but this Gradual PP Gauge just gives you PP over time, guaranteed every 5 seconds, so it kind of just works out. Then this alternative damage, it's like an in-between of the Glass Cannon and the safe damage. We're using the Risky Stance instead of the burn to proc the Endure Pain PB boost. And then for the third spot, you can kind of use either Stealth Wall or Lively HP Starlings, depending on the content that you're doing, and how often you want to like heal yourself up from like this 1 damage. Like the Risky Stance isn't really going to take you out of that 95% with the Lively too often. So if you're like at 1,000 HP, then you'd have to lose more than 50 HP from Risky Stance to get out of that benefit here. So that would take quite some time. But yeah, you can use either or, just depends on how you play and if you have aggro or not. But speaking of aggro, there's the no aggro build. So you definitely want Stealth Wall with that to get extra damage when you have no aggro. The Lively HP Starlings just goes with that as well for more damage. And then you can either use the Gradual Pressing for more down factor, or if you don't have like the Stealth Strike, for instance, then you probably want to use the Dazzle Camouflage to ensure they can keep getting that Stealth Wall extra attack or the long range advantage damage. Then for a mobbing thing, there's enemy field PP gauge, so the extra PP when you kill an enemy. The Lively HP Starlings, once again, that's kind of used in a lot of builds because it's just free damage. And then for the third slot, you can pretty much put anything there. You don't really need anything else beyond that. But I think like a good one to just fill in if you can is the fortune sign, which gives you rest assign back when you use them, or reverse assign gives it back to you at a 20% chance. Just so you don't have to pick it up as much while you're doing combat zone farming. But then the last one is like if you really want to be tanky, then you got the heavy attack protect, so you take less damage from bosses. You got the tri shield, so you got the negation of 3 times. And then for the third spot, it's kind of like up to you. You could use Lively HP Starlings. It gives you a little bit of damage resist and still extra damage. But if you want to be even more damage resistance than like the sign shielding, whenever you use a Resta, which you can use at full HP with this, gives you 20% damage resist for the one hit. And then the patient defense is an alternative to that, where when you get hit multiple times, yeah, you get more damage resistance for 30 seconds at least. Of course, these are just recommendations of what I think are good for, like, myself. You might find some of the other augments better for how you play personally. I think that's how this system is built. Like, the idea behind it is that you want to go for the ones that are best for you, not the best for me or somebody else. So if you want to be tanky but with a little bit of extra damage on the side, then you can. If you want to go full tank, you can. If you want a whole bunch of PP back, you can. You can play however you want with this. And it can change up your gameplay quite a bit depending on which one you choose. That's all I currently have on the EX Augments, though. I think there will be more in the future, probably not for quite some time, but there will probably be more for weapons that are higher baseline of potency, or different kind of unique effects, which could be crazy or something. I don't think, though, there will ever be ones for armor, otherwise they would have to change up the system quite a bit, because could you imagine having 3 of, like, one of these, like, Tough Mind, for instance, on the armor pieces? Like, how does that work, having 3 Tough Minds, so you're just invulnerable 3 separate times, or getting a ton of burns at the same time? I just don't think it works well with having multiple pieces of gear, and I think it works really well with a single weapon, and not expanding it beyond that. You never really know with SEGA because they've done a ton of crazy stuff before. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this helped you guys out with this EX Augment system. Let me know what you guys think of it too, and if you have any other build recommendations that you figured out with this. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.